The previous chapter of the Syria 360, A Crisis Not a Problem video series, addressed war crimes in the Syrian civil war. Moving forward, Chapter 12 will address the visual and attention economies of the civil war. The Syrian civil war has resulted in thousands of casualties, millions of refugees, and insurmountable tragedy. Crimes committed by every side of the conflict have scarred the Syrian people and country. This conflict has burned into the consciousness of millions of humans. However, much of it has been too easily ignored by the rest of the world. Visual and attention economies are how people's attention and interests are drawn in today's globalized and media-centric world. Westerners are able to easily ignore the rest of the world because of a lack of exposure and fleeting attention spans of the media. The first section of this chapter will define attention and visual economies. The second section will consist of a brief overview of the Civil War and the aspects that captured the attention of the West. Finally, these events will be analyzed to understand what makes them important to Westerners. This is the first stage of this section, defining attention economies. The concept of an attention economy is relatively new. In the last 10 to 20 years, human attention has become a scarce resource because of growth of communication media. As a result, audiences are becoming more and more easily distracted and disinterested. To attract and hold attention, messages must be meaningful and significant, emphasizing context over content. Because of this growth of media presence in ordinary lives, attention is captured by certain sensationalized events that the media elects to focus upon. Attention economies are ruled by the media, and that media often plays off emotions to make a point or attract attention. Within this research, the attention economies of the United States and other Western nations will be focused on. However, different countries will have different focuses. The impact of media coverage can be seen in the concept of framing, which is the way events and issues are organized and made sense of by media, as shown by Stephen D. Rees in Framing Public Life. Certain issues are granted greater coverage and are portrayed in different lights. One argument in the debate on the ethics of framing is that the media's framing of issues can directly influence the media viewers and their perception of issues. This is an image from a Washington Post article about the correlation between U.S. Google searches regarding other countries and the amount of time those countries are mentioned on television. This showcases a strong relationship between airtime and attention paid. The second map shows how often each country in the world was mentioned by American television news programming from 2009 to 2016. These two maps show how much of society's understanding of the rest of the world is ruled by television and the media. Clearly, media influences the mind of the American people, and framing, as well as lack of exposure, can make an even greater impact on people's perceptions. The second map shows how often each country in the world was mentioned by American television news programming from 2009 to 2016. These two maps show how much of society's understanding of the rest of the world is ruled by television and the media. Clearly, media influences the mind of the American people, and framing, as well as lack of exposure, can make an even greater impact on people's perceptions. Far too many events take place daily for international media to accurately keep up. As a result, only stories that are deemed newsworthy are able to make it to the public consciousness. This leads to crises only receiving attention for a short burst of time, and is known as compassion fatigue. Khalid H. Ledru published a report in The Atlantic about this issue, looking into media coverage of the April 2015 earthquake in Nepal. He uses the GDELT project, there will be more on this later, to track international media coverage of Nepal. He found that coverage increased for a 72-hour period and then decreased rapidly, and overall Nepal was only focused on for about 2 weeks. This pattern of a 72-hour coverage window was then found to be a repeating pattern in the coverage of other tragedies and crises. It can be seen in the coverage of Syria, with sudden spikes in coverage and representation after large-scale events. These spikes then die down almost as quickly as they arise. The pattern of 72-hour coverage showcases the difficulty in keeping attention focused on an issue. Disaster work takes years, but the majority of the world is only exposed to news about crises for a few hours. The attention economies are not being accessed for long enough to create a sizable impact. Extensive and accurate coverage is needed to force issues back into the forefront of the collective consciousness. One way to showcase the lack of attention paid to Syria is Google spike searches. In this data provided by Google Trends, numbers represent search interest relative to the highest point on the chart for the given region and time. A value of 100 is therefore the peak popularity of the term, whereas a value of 50 means that term is half as popular. Here are the search results for Syrian civil war from January 2015 to March 2017, and Syria from March 2012 till April 2017. Only a few moments resulted in a large-scale spike of people searching, and in fact there were no Google spike searches of over 25 from August 2013 to August 2015, over 2 years during which the Syrian war was being fought. The second stage of this section will define visual economies. The term visual economy refers to the images that capture popular imagination and empathy, and often emotional economies are ruled by visual economies. When considering the visual economy between two countries or regions, one must also be conscious of the ways images circulate between countries and remain aware of the images dominating that exchange. In the case of Syria and the United States, there are clear power dynamics at play between the two states. Through the analysis of the flow of images, relationships between countries and their people can be understood. Michael Griffin writes about the importance of images in war reporting in the April 2010 issue of Media, War, and Conflict, an academic journal. Images have been key to political mobilization, and this is shown through Griffin's analysis of the iconic images of the Vietnam War. Emotionally charged images impact populations and can lead to increased mobilization. Emotional impact is vital to visual economies, and this can be seen in images of the Syrian people. Some of the first viral images of the civil war were images taken of Alan Kurdi after his death attempting to flee Syria. These images of Alan, a 5-year-old boy lying in the Turkish sand, are instantaneously recognizable and evoke an understandably strong emotional response. These images are some of the most widely shared images of the Civil War, and they went viral almost immediately. There is also much debate regarding the ethics of the photos and the different responses to them. One popular article called The Boy on the Beach, run by the New York Times Magazine, was criticized for the author's personalized viewing of the photographs. Rather than addressing the consequences and causes of the Civil War, he focused on his own emotional reaction to seeing the distressing images. This approach, framing this tragedy in such a personal light, was criticized for ignoring the actual victims of the war. There's an inherent tug of war between raising awareness of the war and doing so in a way that is respectful of those impacted. Similar images went viral 1 year later when Omaran Daknesh was photographed after being pulled out of his destroyed home in Aleppo. The images of the child staring blankly into the camera captured the attention of the world. Omaran was photoshopped into images showcasing the lack of representation for Syrian people. These images gained traction on Twitter and increased attention on Aleppo, at least for a while. The next section will provide a very basic timeline of the Syrian Civil War and the events that played into the emotional economies of the American people. In 2000, the first President Assad, who had ruled from 1971, died and was succeeded by his son, Bashar, thus continuing the Assad regime. In May of 2002, Syria was included in a list of Axis of Evil States by President George W. Bush. This was a political move designed to influence the opinions and emotional economies of the American people. Tensions with the U.S. continued to escalate throughout the following years, as human rights abuses and similar concerns were revealed, framing the international conversations and reporting concerning Syria. March 15, 2011 was dubbed the Day of Rage by protesters as hundreds protested in Damascus and Aleppo, calling for reforms and civil liberties. This Day of Rage was shared massively throughout Syria, but did not receive similar attention in Western media. In May 2011, 13-year-old Hamza Akahib was brutally murdered while he was in the custody of Syrian security forces. Unsettling images created an emotional response and forced Westerners to understand the brutality of the events in Syria. This is one of the first examples of visual economy in the Civil War. In 2012, President Obama warned that the usage of chemical weapons by the Syrian government would tilt the United States towards intervention in Syria. By March 2013, the UN registered Syrian refugees numbered over 1 million, with at least half being children, and by October that number had doubled. During this time, there was also a Google search spike on the terms Syrian civil war and Syria, after news of a chemical attack carried out in Damascus suburbs in Syria hit the Western media. In June of 2014, the Islamic State group seized large parts of northern and western Iraq and declared a self-styled Islamic Caliphate. On the 19th of August, Islamic State militants released their first video beheading James Foley, who was one of 5 Westerners to be murdered by the group in such a manner. This shows how media and images can be manipulated to instill fear within different populations. Throughout August and September 2015, there were Google search spikes in both the terms Syrian civil war and Syria. During this time, Russia launched its first airstrikes in Syria, and questions arose regarding whether or not the strikes were against ISIS. On the 2nd of September, the images of Alan Kurdi went viral. On the 15th of November 2015, the attacks on Paris were traced to Syrian refugee passport. Following this, Syrian refugees became increasingly discriminated against and treated with growing suspicion. On the 20th of February 2016, a truce between the U.S. and Russia called for a ceasefire and a concentration on fighting against ISIS. Throughout May of 2016, a Twitter movement was launched to show solidarity and bring attention to the devastation in Aleppo, with the hashtag Aleppo is burning. This is an excellent example of using social media to attract attention and highlight the emotional aspect of the war. In August 2016, the photos of Omran Deknesh went viral. They captured the attention of the world and again showcased the impact of emotional and visual economy. On April 6, 2017, President Trump launched a military strike on a Syrian airbase, the first U.S. direct military action against Syria. The next section will analyze the Google search spikes and why these may have attracted American attention. The next section will analyze the Google search spikes and why these may have attracted American attention. The first Google search spike relating to the Syrian civil war was in August 2013, regarding the usage of chemical weapons on the Syrian people. This is somewhat heartening as it is an inherently humanitarian issue, showing that Americans can care about the Syrian people. However, this concern did not last long, as the next spike was not until 2015, showcasing the power of the 72-hour cycle. As soon as the chemical weapons became old news and was no longer mentioned as frequently, people stopped caring. The next spike was in September 2015, following Russian airstrikes on Syria. This shows the American populace is concerned for things that have the potential to become threatening to them, like Russian weapons. Americans will care about Syria if it's seen as being threatening to their own way of life. There was another spike in November 2015 after the Paris attacks, when a Syrian refugee passport was found at the attack scene. Americans care when other Western countries are impacted, as this makes it more likely for America to be attacked as well. Another spike occurred in August 2016. This concerned the fall of Aleppo and the resulting hashtags and social media outrages, as well as the photos of Omar and Daknesh going viral. This again shows the humanitarian side of people. Attention can be attracted. The main concern is just keeping that attention held long enough for it to have a real impact. There was another massive spike on April 6, 2017, after Trump's military strike on a Syrian airbase. However, within a week, the spike was completely gone. Media coverage, although intense, was again fleeting. This graph is from the GDEL project, a nonprofit research initiative supported by Google Ideas. It tries to understand global society through open information like local news media. The project offers a variety of free data sets that are available online. For this research, the Tone Timeline Visualizer was used. The Tone Timeline Visualizer plots the average tone from extremely positive to extremely negative over a search of the GDEL Global Knowledge Graph, creating a visualization of how emotion is changing over time. This graph represents the tone of the keyword Syria from April 2013 to April 26, 2017, and including media, both mass and social. The trend map shows a constant negative tone, never rising to a rating of a -2. Syria is constantly represented negatively in Western media, which influences the attention economies of Westerners. This, in combination with the Google spike searches, shows how the framing of media influences the perception of events. With limited coverage in both scope and length comes a limited understanding, which directly influences perceptions. This research has made it clear that the Syrian civil war is not receiving adequate or accurate coverage in the media. With this, visual and attention economies are manipulated to a certain view, ignoring the actualities of the Syrian civil war. This has been the final chapter of the Syrian Civil War video series, Syria 360, A Crisis Not a Problem. Syrian history, conflict, and people have been explored throughout this series. Hopefully these videos will increase the knowledge surrounding Syria and even move some people to make a change. Thank you so much for watching, and please feel free to share these videos if they have been helpful.